Hey everyone, Raf here from Retro Comics. This is just a special one-off episode because I had just heard June 30th that Jim Shooter had passed away at the age of 73. And, lately for me, there have been a lot of significant names that I've known growing up in comic books. So like Jackson Guice, also known as Butch Guice, and more recently Peter David, who passed away. And these are familiar names that I knew, as I grew up reading comic books. And when I heard that Jim Shooter passed away, this one kind of hit pretty hard. He was 73 and he had been battling cancer. But, like your superheroes, you always think that these talented people are kind of like superheroic and invulnerable to these kind of things. So I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about Jim Shooter, how important he was to me as a comic book collector, because one of the first comic books that I ever read was Avengers 164, and he wrote that. It was also penciled by John Byrne. And, that was kind of a really formative comic book for me. And that was a time, there was a fair amount of turmoil at Marvel. And Jim Shooter would go on from becoming a writer to becoming editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics. And this was a big step, and I think he did a lot of things good for Marvel during his early years. He certainly brought a more kind of business-like, personality to the role. And he was very strict on adhering to kind of like continuity as well as hitting deadlines. And, the editor-in-chief position at Marvel, or any kind of like high-level position where you're managing talent, is pretty hard. As a person who's, managed people before, like I tell you, managing people, even a small group, can be extremely challenging and taxing. And I can only imagine how challenging it was for Jim Shooter. But, it helps that he was a really big guy, like 6'3" or 6'4", a very imposing figure. But, I think a lot of the stuff that he brought to the table was really good for Marvel at that time. And I think a lot of the talent who was working there at that time would certainly agree. Now, just to talk about some of the stuff that Jim Shooter worked on, when he was 14, he started to work for DC, actually writing comic books and writing stories for Legion of Superheroes, which is, pretty crazy, pretty incredible. And he would eventually move to Marvel and start writing there. And, a lot of people will know Jim Shooter for Secret Wars that he wrote at Marvel, probably the most successful thing that he worked on at Marvel while he was there. But it also contributed to his kind of leaving of Marvel, especially after Secret Wars 2, because I think a lot of the creators were starting to chafe under his, very strict, you could even almost, a lot of people would describe kind of like tyrannical rule at Marvel. And I kind of think of it this, like coaches in professional sports. You can have like different types of coaches, and these kind of like tough guy coaches that can certainly improve the team in the first couple of years. They start to wear out their welcome after a period of time, and I think this is what was happening with Jim Shooter. The success of Secret Wars, brought him to new heights, but as a result, it maybe, gave him too much of a kind of a power trip mentality that he wasn't maybe listening to his talent anymore. And I think, when he was let go from Marvel I believe in 1987, he was able to take some time off to kind of retool and rethink and just come down from that the stress and the high of being editor-in-chief at Marvel to maybe kind of reformulate and rethink of new ideas. And from that came Valiant. And Valiant, when it first came out, was pretty quiet, but it like became huge literally overnight. And And I remember like reading like specifically Harbinger, because I picked up the trade paperback of Harbinger when it came out, and I'm like, wow, this is great stuff. I really like it. So and other stuff like Doc Solar and Magnus Robot Fighter were very popular, and yeah, he kind of brought that energy back that he had before. So Valiant was huge and a real like second win comeback for Jim Shooter. And unfortunately, like his tenure at Valiant didn't last long as well too. And I think was it after like I think Acclaim bought Valiant, and maybe he had some kind of like disputes with people again, and he left. And Valiant wasn't the same after that, and really didn't last very long. You could probably blame a lot of that with Acclaim, the video game company that came in and was just looking to make money. And the thing that Jim Shooter is or was like, he certainly loved comic books, and he knew a lot about the comic book industry. And there's stuff that, and he shared a lot of that on his blog. And if you ever have time, and I hope to keep that blog around for a while, because there are a lot of amazing stories there that you can read about how the industry works, what the industry was like back in the day. There's a lot of interesting stuff that he had to deal with back then. And, when he became like, editor-in-chief, there were a lot of people that kind of went through that system and realized it wasn't a good fit. And it does take a person with certain fortitude or attitude to be in that kind of role, to manage those people. And he was the right person at the right time. And I think as a comic book fan and reader, we were really lucky because Marvel at that time, when you think about some of the stuff that came out from, the Claremont Byrne X-Men to Simonson's Thor to like Miller Daredevil stuff, there was some awesome stuff that came out of Marvel at that time. And, Jim Shooter brought in that rigorous, how would you say, discipline to that industry that I think was important. Because, you look at independent publishers, and I think the one thing they struggle with is that once they have a few issues in the bank and they get them out, realizing how difficult it is to maintain that schedule where you able to kind of put out good creative content on a regular basis. And I think if you talk to any creators about that, they will agree. It's not an easy grind. And I think Shooter was able to kind of bring that discipline in at Marvel, which served really well. I was really sad when I heard that Shooter passed away. I've only met him briefly once at a Toronto fan expo a long time ago, and just to go by and say hello and say thank you. And I understand he's very good, very friendly in terms of like sharing a lot of the stories. He'll with not a lot, but with some of these creators, especially these old school folk, they will talk your ear off in terms of the stories that they will, they can tell about how the industry was, back in the day. It was, an exciting, different time, certainly different than it is these days. So this is a bit different. This is kind of like, just felt like I just wanted to talk about Jim Shooter just because he passed away, and he was a pretty important figure for me, despite his flaws, and we all have flaws, for Marvel and for me as a comic book reader. And I want to give a hat tip to Comic Book Ninja, because he sent me a note about this, and he said I should make a video about this, and I thought, oh, you know what, I can, for Jim Shooter, I'd like to make a longer form video, but I just wanted to get this one kind of out quickly, just because, well, it's in my brain while I have the thoughts about Jim Shooter. I really, if you've never read any of his stuff, I think some of that early Valiant stuff, like I really liked Harbinger. His Avengers stuff especially the Korvac saga, is, in my opinion, his, magnum opus, his best work. And even I made a video about that as well too. But really sad to hear. Cancer really sucks, and it's sad to hear about all these awesome comic book talents leave us. But I'm happy he was here and he did the work that he did that gave us so much enjoyment in comic books. Thanks for stopping by, and until next time, read and enjoy your comic books.